All right, we're going to discuss interpersonal and close relationships in the African American community. So, in case you were wondering, yes, racial and ethnic discrimination does affect the well being of development during adolescence. As you know, interpersonal relationships do start to build up in adolescence. They're very important for males and females, and experiencing discrimination ends up permeating all aspects of your development. It could make you self conscious, it could deter you from wanting to seek out and be interacting with your peers. So it's going to have some negative effects, given that this is a really crucial part of development and you're really establishing the types of relationships that really could last a lifetime, whether they be friendships or romantic relationships. So there's a lot of different types of relationships, and let's discuss these. There are voluntary relationships, being ones that you choose, and there are involuntary relationships, being ones that happen out of circumstance, as well as friendships and romantic relationships. In terms of an equitable relationship, this is referring to the fact that each person wants out of a relationship what they put in, and so it is being reciprocated, and so it is equitable, it is equal. This means that the relationship is not one-sided. Everybody gets their needs met in the relationship. So this could be applied to a platonic friendship relationship. That's an equitable relationship there. It could be applied to a romantic relationship. Are you getting what you need out of your marriage or relationship with your significant other, etc.? And so we just want to make sure that we don't have an imbalance of needs being met, because that throws off the relationship really. Also, in exchange relationships, people give benefits with the expectation that they will soon receive comparable benefits, which is seen more so in involuntary employer relationships or neighborhood relationships. So they are giving something with the expectation they get something back as a function of the relationship. That's how we see that more with like formalized relationships, like employee-employer, etc. Communal relationships are those in which one person feels responsible for the well-being of another person, which is seen in family relationships, right? Close friendships and romantic friendships. People in communal relationships, they prefer to talk about emotions and intimate topics. People in exchange relationships prefer to talk about non-verbal topics like activities and hobbies. African Americans tend to gravitate towards more communal relationships and value interpersonal relationships, also known as communalism, relationship orientation, and collective orientation. This is in line with the spirit of Ubuntu, which we'd already talked about in this class, because they tend to be more communal. Close friendships generally happen among the same sex or gender. African American women rate their friendships stronger than African American males, and African American males tend to bond over activities, whereas females bond over sharing emotional experiences. I think that might be true across all ethnic groups, right? Makes sense. At adolescence, that's generally what folks are doing. So here we see adolescent friendships and cliques, small, close-knit groups ranging from 3 to 10. They usually have some type of commonality in them. And so we're going to talk about some adolescent friendships here. It's a time period of growth and identity for youth. It's very important to them at this age and stage for them to figure out who they are while putting so much stock in their peers. So if a peer says something negative and critical and condescending, a child could really internalize that. Adolescent could really internalize that. And the same thing if their peers are supportive. They internalize the support as well, and that's good for their development, especially at this time of their lives during such an influential age, right? Studies have found that African American youth are more likely than white youth to spend more time with their neighborhood peers than with their school peers. This could be linked to growing up in a collective neighborhood space where you have grown up together. Could it also be linked to not going to school in your own area in the time of busing? Back in the day, that's what was happening, is people of color were being bused to white schools in order to desegregate them. All right, so one important factor that involves the lives of African American males growing up is a concept called bravado, according to the reading. Bravado is basically a hypermasculine or macho identity that individuals who live in high-risk neighborhoods and environments develop. What this means is that it could be important or necessary for African American adolescent males to develop a street sense in relation to surviving their neighborhoods if they live in a violent or gang-affiliated area. Without this bravado, without this street smarts, it might make it harder to survive. Thus, programs that help males to develop positive peer relationships would be useful in enhancing overall well-being and in deterring boys from joining gangs and expressing violence, and things of that nature, and other problematic behaviors. So, in terms of African American female relationships, identity and self worth are crucial during adolescence, and they are attached to interactions with peers as they play a significant part in both of these areas. So, healthy friendships promote healthy development, whereas negative experiences such as bullying can lead to an increase in negative interpersonal relationships, negative self esteem, negative self worth, resulting in relational aggression such as gossiping, bullying physically or online, withdrawing affection to get what you want, socially excluding others, etc. Girls are more likely to do these things than boys, who are more apt to engage in aggression. And again, programs that would promote positive female mentors and healthy relationships and anti-bullying campaigns would help to counter the negative relationships that can develop at these ages and stages. I would say also the pressure for males to be perceived as more masculine can be detrimental to them as well if they are more neutral presenting or even female presenting. And for girls, the competition to be most beautiful is heightened at this age and stage, and it has detrimental effects, especially with colorism intersecting with this developmental stage in the African American community. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to switch and talk about love. So the book mentions companionate love versus passionate love. So, companionate love is seen in close friendships. It is a feeling of intimacy and affection that does not include psychological arousal, passion, and desire. And close friendships really do start in adolescence. They don't always continue out through the rest of your life, but they do start in adolescence. Passionate love is the romantic love that we all are familiar with in terms of those Disney movies, right? And intense feelings and psychological longing and limerence and arousal for one another. As true with other ethnic groups, romantic love most likely occurs during the period of late adolescence to early adulthood. Culturally in the US, I think our culture and society pushes us towards wanting a passionate love and someone sweeping us off our feet, so to speak, like we see in the movies. And that's not the only type of love. You know, I think we can all pinpoint more romantic movies that end with the guy getting the girl at the end of the movie, but it's not always the goal. I mean, can you imagine though? There are less movies about romance that end with a bunch of friends just hanging out, living their best life at the end of the movie, right? So we do tend to over romanticize things in this country, and sometimes in the media, I feel like we look at those and we don't have. If you don't have a mate, you feel like you're missing something. The norm, quote unquote, in this society is to have a mate, to be paired, to be partnered, and so the minority in that category would be being a solo person, right, living your best life. So we hear, we can see even in the way our society is structured that things are set up for partnership. And so people are usually being pushed in society to procure a romantic type of love. And, you know, that's just not the way that the rest of the world works. Sometimes there's arranged marriages, you know, and they work out just as fine as anything else, right? We have two more theories of love on this slide. One of them is John Lee's, and he proposed 6 different types of love. We have eros, which is a passionate love; ludus, which is a playful, flirtatious love; storge, which is a companionate, a friend-based, platonic love. We have pragma, very practical love. That would be a arranged marriage, so to speak. Mania, a manic, obsessive love, which can usually be involved with cycles of abuse or explosions. You know, they're obsessed with somebody and then eventually something happens and they explode at each other, etc., and it goes in a cycle. And then there's the agape, the selfless, compassionate love, and that is generally it can be a romantic love as well. So Lee suggested there was dominant and secondary styles of love that we generally tend to gather towards. So if you think about your romantic relationships, perhaps that makes sense with what he postulated in his theory. Another theory on love is that there's stages of relationships, and there's 4 according to this researcher. And the first one is euphoric. So everything is happy. It's a honeymoon stage, 6 months to 2 years. Stage 2, early attachment. Physiologically, our brains do release chemicals that help us to bond, the bonding chemicals that help us to bond with our partners and attach to them. That's usually what's happening in these stages here. Stage 2. Stage 3 is the crisis stage. Eventually something goes wrong in your relationship, and eventually you have to figure out if you're going to make it through this crisis, right? And if you can, you're stronger on the other end. You have more bonding, and that leads us to stage 4, which is deep attachment, and 7 years and beyond. So even in a marriage, these stages exist, and I think it's apropos to make sure you don't mistake one crisis for ending a relationship if it's a healthy relationship, right? All right, one more theory of love here. We have the triangular theory of love, and this postulates that if you don't have all three components in a relationship, the relationship will eventually fade out or fail. So that is passion, intimacy, and commitment. So, for example, a relationship that has a lot of intimacy and commitment might mean that you're emotionally sharing things with your partner. You're emotionally deep and connected, and you're committed. So maybe you have an arranged marriage per se, and so you're already committed to one another. But there's no passion. There's no va va voom. It's just like two ships passing in the night sometimes. A relationship that is passionate and committed, but no intimacy means you might have a whole lot of passion going on, but and you're together, in a relationship is solidified, but there's no emotional intimacy. And so that can be draining on somebody who needs emotional intimacy in a relationship, right? And then the third one would be a passionate relationship with intimacy, but no commitment. So this could look like a situationship, a friendship, situationship, or whatever you call it these days. But there's no commitment, but you do share your intimate feelings, your emotional feelings, and you are, physically involved with the person. So there's a lot of different types of love, and, people can transition. Maybe you start a relationship with all three factors here, but you end up, moving into more an empty love when you don't have the intimacy, right? And so you can go through, like this with the stages of love, you can go through a crisis, and that would affect the three corners of this triangle. And if you can make it through, you can continue to build on that, and if not, it might fall apart. So there's different theories of love. Well, let's transition to mate availability across cultures. So there is a marriage squeeze and a sex ratio imbalance. The marriage squeeze refers to the baby boomers decreasing the availability of marriage partners among female baby boomers as they get older, and the sex ratio imbalance where there are more females than males. And presently, there is more of a likelihood that folks don't want to get married. They would rather stay single. They have enough money because they work, and so they are happy as a solo individual. And so this affects the Black community as well. And so as we look at relationships across ages and stages, the older folks, they might be divorced. And then as I already mentioned in a previous presentation, African American women are less likely to remarry once they get a divorce. They're also less likely to be married statistically across the board in this instance here. So mate selection does change the availability of who we have to choose from, right? And so let's continue talking about this here. So as seen in the previous slides, there's a decrease in the number of marriages among African Americans, but that's also a decrease among all ethnicities in the U.S. And some reasons that perpetuate these statistics could be decline in economic viability. So the types of jobs that we get in the African American community could make it a struggle to want to settle down, as some people want to settle down when they feel they have enough means. And so if that's a challenge, they might be postponing when they settle down, and when they have kids, they're pushing that out till further age. So lower employment, underemployment. Underemployment means you have multiple jobs, but you're still not making enough money. So underemployment rates can be higher in the African American community. And one factor in mate selection is that you would hope to find someone who can financially contribute equally to a relationship, so it's not lopsided, but that might be a hindrance in the African American community if folks are struggling to find viable employment. So another factor that could be the numbers of incarceration among African American males, but some attribute the decline to the idea that perhaps African Americans may hold attitudes about marriage that are counter to traditional rearing, which expects one to get a job and get married and have children. Some say that this is simply culturally accepted to choose to have children and not be married in the African American community. And I really think it depends on the family. I think it depends on what they think is normal, what they think is should be expected, what they parents push their children to do. I will say though that more as I already mentioned, more African American males tend to date outside of the race, and more Black women want to. It seems like they want to date a within their race, which would mean if they're waiting around, for a partner to be, as they say, equally yoked in terms of what they can provide in the relationship. And if that's a challenge, then you have the incarceration challenge. And then you also have the fact that a lot of times Black men are more willing to date outside their race. So it kind of compounds with the number of eligible couples that we have in the Black community in the US. And statistically, if a woman receives a higher education degree, her job usually tends to coincide with a higher pay. And so now there's a discrepancy with levels of education. We know more Black women go through college and get more degrees actually than any other group in the United States. And so if we have if Black women have more degrees and better jobs than the Black men, well, then they really are shrinking their pool of eligible men if they are looking for someone to be comparable to them in terms of degrees and bringing in money. Some people that doesn't matter so much to, as long as they are present and helping and supportive in many other ways, because you can contribute more than just financially to a relationship. You can contribute in labor, you can contribute in emotional support, you can contribute in mental viability as well. And so it just depends on what people value in their relationships as to what they contribute and who you're going to be selecting as a mate. And economic factors do play into that in the African American community as well. All right. What is homogamy? This refers to the fact that in the U.S., we tend to marry someone who is on our similar age, race, education, neighborhood, religion, demographic characteristics such as that. It also is a trend in this country to, if you are a woman, marry someone who might be a little older, a little more established, right? That that could also, wanting someone older and established could limit selection inadvertently as women get older. So another trend in this country is for the man to focus on finding someone who is more attractive to be with as a status symbol. That happens in all ethnicities, actually. And that's kind of called social exchange theory. The man wants the woman who is more attractive to raise his status. The woman wants someone who is older and more established to raise her status. And according to social exchange theory, the relationship benefits both parties in that way. I'll say this is seen a little bit less in the African American community compared to the larger society. However, there's always this, somebody who doesn't fall into the statistic stereotype. But there's also people who fall out of that stereotype in such that they are looking for, I see this more nowadays as opposed to when the text was written. Folks who, and I think it has a lot to do with social media impacting mate selection, because you see on social media, so-and-so is my provider, or what they might even call it sugar daddy or sugar mama. Like, they're looking for someone to just specifically be a provider, and they're looking to benefit from that arrangement. And so social media has really altered and changed a lot of what people look for in relationships. And there's a lot of more toxicity as well, I believe, especially lately. There seems to be more conversations about the role that men and women play in relationships and the expectations of partners, and somehow going back to the way things used to be and how great that would be. But I don't really subscribe to that. I think that society's values change, and so people adapt to those. But some folks are saying there's a lot of hatred right now for men and for women, even in the Black community. And I think it has a lot to do with the detrimental outlooks on how dating can be used as opportunities to get gifts, to get income, to get food, to get bills paid for, etc. And so men a lot of times are feeling like they are just a cash register. Women are feeling like they should be cared for. And then a lot of these toxic channels on Instagram and whatnot are talking about really denigrating the man and the woman in different diverse ways. And so I think social media has really done it a disservice, especially with dating, because with dating on the apps, it has changed the motivation for dating to be more quick interactions, and you're swiping and you're getting that dopamine hit, which becomes addicting. And so instead of building the relationships, you just keep swiping to keep feeling like somebody likes you, somebody wants to match with you, etc. I know the book is written prior to when online dating occurred, and so it's not necessarily in there, but I'm sure it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to think about how that could impact African American community. There was a study done that showed that algorithms on dating apps tend to weed out certain people of color, certain groups, and so that's one way technology and race and human behavior has been impacting mate selection in that way. All right, so it might seem, here we have African American marriage norms. It might be seen less for a number of the marriage numbers might be less for a few various reasons we've been talking about. And in fact, are attributing mate selection to relationship and character qualities that might be more prevalent in the African American community because wealth and education might not have been achieved yet. And what I mean is, using other qualities outside of job and how much money someone makes could be at a higher percentage. So character of quality and other things that someone can contribute to the relationship might be looked at more of in the African American community because it could be a challenge, as we've already mentioned, to get and attain the education and the financial income. So social exchange norms do change, and they also are not in line with many African American women because they do tend to be better educated and more upwardly mobile than African American males. So that's similar to other ethnicities. African American women tend to live longer as well. That is the same compared to other ethnicities. Women live longer than men because we tend to take care of ourselves better and go to the doctor. So, as they call it, quote unquote, marrying down, postponing marriage, or trying to find a suitable mate in a various other ways, marrying someone from another ethnicity or who is older or younger, or these might be choices for African American women that they must face in order to select a partner. One more interesting fact about that study that I read on online dating and how race plays a part: the two categories that were chosen and swiped on the least were African American women and Asian men. And so some people were saying that African American women stereotypes, even other cultures who interpret the behavior of African American women, they see the negative stereotype first of the loud, angry black woman, or boisterous, loud, quote unquote, ghetto black woman. And so they're not swiping. So someone was saying they think that might be the reason why. For Asian men, they were saying they think that the stereotype of not being a sex symbol and not being taken seriously and not be seen as masculine has an impact there. And so it'd be interesting to see how the research continues to develop in those areas. All right, so when asked about what were the qualities they desired in a male or mate, African American women desired financial stability and education, while African American men stated honesty and sensitivity, according to one study that the book mentioned. And I wonder if a present study would come up with any other top characteristics. Also, colorism plays a part. Unfortunately, colorism happens within the Black community, and yes, it is alive and well. And there's a long history regarding this subject. Studies have shown that the lighter-skinned African American women fare better in terms of being selected as marriage material, were employed more often in higher-paying careers, had achieved a higher socioeconomic status, and were seen as more desirable. This does stem from stereotypes from slavery back in the day of lighter skinned folks being chosen to be in the house, darker skinned folks were in the fields. And so the colorism has started from slavery, where the treatment was different. And so people would try to figure out a way to be associated with better qualities, closer to whiteness in that way. And we all know how lighter skinned folks come about. They come about from mixing interracial relationships, which during slavery times was illegal. But it happened obviously because there were lighter skinned folks and folks that were so light they could pass as white. And so they were, I'm sure, trying to get the benefits of better treatment in society at that time. And so the trickle down effect is still present to this day. So this doesn't mean that darker skinned women don't become educated and don't apply to higher paying jobs, etc. But in our society, there seems to still be a gravitation towards lighter skinned. Some would say that this is a form of neo slavery ideals being repeated as a tactic of division. You know, preference for lighter skin can be seen in like movies, in TV shows, on media, and a proponent of even I would say I've seen some documentaries where black men say that their mother has told them since from a young age to find a lighter skinned woman, right? And that they will have their children will have a better time in life because of it. And so the mentality still persists, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, and then also some of the dark skinned ladies were reporting that their experiences dating men was that nobody wanted to marry the dark skinned woman. They were willing to fool around with the dark skinned woman, but they would settle down with the light skinned woman. So I think I've seen more dark skinned women in media being portrayed as beautiful, like Lupita and a few other folks. And maybe this is changing, but I'm sure that it's going to take a while. I know that in some parts of the world, they still do things like try to lighten their skin with skin lightening products, which are so detrimental, very bad. And this all just falls under the umbrella of colorism. So studies have found that exposure to diversity is one of the number one ways that preferences for light skin color and increases willingness to marry someone of a lower socioeconomic status. So what this is saying is that diversity is a good thing. Diversity means that it decreases colorism and it increases people's willingness to date outside of these ideals that society places on the ultimate partner, right? Making a lot of money and all these types of things. So attraction is such an interesting thing. One of the most influential determining factors of whether or not we are attracted to one another is proximity. So if someone's around your neighborhood, if you can interact with that person, if you can become physically close to that person, the fact is that people we tend to be most attracted to tend to be people we live close to and come into contact with. Now, I would say that social media probably has had some effect on that as we can interact with more people in more ways, and the world has become smaller in that way. So, probably some impact there. So, as such, interracial attitudes and friendships are improved by proximity and our ability to find similarities with diverse groups. So, not only that studies have found that, to no surprise, we as humans generally tend to like more physically attractive people, as well as heterosexual relationships and in the LGBTQA plus communities. So, now, are these beauty standards universal or are we influenced by society standards around us? I'm sure you can assume we are influenced by society standards around us. Unfortunately, in the past, there's been a lot of push to look more Eurocentric as that was seen as a standard of beauty. However, I would say beauty standards have long been a topic of contention in the Black community because, as we know, standard of beauty in the U.S. is to be Eurocentric, but I think things are kind of changing now. But it's this very manicured, wavy or straight hair, even blonde per se, as opposed to brunette, right? Or a redhead is really blonde hair, blue eyes, petite frame as being ideal. But even socially and historically, that the body shape has changed. So it was like stick thin for a while. That was the ideal. Then it was like Marilyn Monroe, and then it swung back to stick thin, and then it went to Kim Kardashian and curves, and you're injecting this over there, So, the pendulum swings back and forth, and anybody who studies the history of our mainstream media, cinema, and print can conclude the same thing, that these standards have shaped our understanding of what it means to be beautiful in this country. So anything deviating from the quote-unquote norm would be deemed as other or not beautiful. Take, for example, words that were used to describe the black hair as nappy or bad hair, associating it with being unprofessional, even locks, dreadlocks being unkept. All right, these are real associations to this day. And we even had the Crown Act passed, which said that, you could wear your hair in its natural state as a black woman and it would be seen as professional. Because, the propensity to see curvy women and curvy hair on women was to be associated with being unkept, and I used to get comments like, why didn't you do something with your hair? I'm like, it's coming out of my head curly, it is done. So also the propensity to see curvy women as overweight in this country would mean that the curvy body of a black woman would be seen as overweight. We do know that that's not always true. Like the BMI we know now is not actually entirely accurate or correct. Some have pointed out that the dichotomy between black people who were ridiculed for having thicker lips and bigger waists and bigger thighs and things of that nature, and among compared to other ethnicities that will inject filler into their lips, try to get bigger features, etc., is actually a double standard. So if an African American does it, um, it's is seen, if an African American is born a particular way, is seen as other, right? But if someone tries to make themselves that way, all of a sudden it's like, oh, people put tanning lotion on because they want to be tan, when we were talking about black folks who already have melanin, they don't need a tan, right? But they get looked down on for having dark skin. So there's a dichotomy of thinking there, right? So there have been positive identity movements in the African American community to identify black as beautiful. So you'll see a lot of promotions of statements of black as beautiful, happy to be nappy, naturally natural, talking about really recodifying and putting a positive strength-based twist on our phenotypical features. It's really it's been around for a while. It's still gaining traction, or still it's changing, I would say. And so we even had a natural hair movement. I think there was a pull away from the afro after the civil rights movement because it was seen as militant, and so people pulled away from that. But I think it's coming back. We see more natural hairstyles that are less damaging to our hair. And contrary to popular belief, our hair does grow. It just breaks off unless you take care of it. And so over processing makes it break off. And so that's when people started to believe that black hair just didn't grow. So redefining, taking ownership of those beauty standards, making it more inclusive has been happening in the past few years. We have seen this more especially when I was a child, wasn't really talked about that much. So this shift in aesthetic, this shift in embracing and celebrating one's beauty is present in the black community. All right, so people who live in California and other states on the West Coast are definitely more likely than persons who live in other parts of the U.S. to date and marry internationally, according to the text. Sorry, interracial dating and interracial marriage has been shown to be fairly highly accepted for those aged 18 to 29, with 90% of them saying that they accept this. So I'll tell you, back when my dad and mom got married in the 80s, it was not accepted. I lived in Orange County and we got stared at all the time. Also, though, I would say even from the 80s till now, it was more seen that a black man would marry outside of his race. And now we do see an increase of black women being the ones in interracial relationship. And I just assume that's probably because we have trouble finding partners within the black community, as I've already stated. All right, so yes, we are more likely to interracially date and interracially marry. And interestingly enough, on dating sites, part of what I was mentioning earlier is that people can actually limit their preferences based on race. So people have the ability, and that's not just the algorithm, it's actually people's preferences. And everybody has a preference, and they can limit their search based on their own racial identity group, and so that has implications on who we find in our feed and who's available to us. All right, last slide here: African American same-sex couples. The book mentions a little bit about same-sex marriage coming to fruition in 2015, and that research has debunked the myth that same-sex relationships mimic heterosexual marriages by forming husband and wife roles. Actually, sexual minority women report that the progression of relationships may be slowed by different levels of being out, which means different of levels of people knowing that you are LGBTQIA plus, along with relationship stress, such as pretending to be friends and not being partners in public. Historically, this was a thing. I know with older generations, they will still call someone their roommate, even though they've been significant othered and partnered for 30 years, you know? So now it is much more acceptable. However, I will say that across the US, when you compare different cultures, in the African American community, it's less accepted for especially men to be LGBTQIA plus identified. And so we're still seeing some hesitancy in accepting that. But in this community, couples reported meeting in spaces that were created for LGBTQIA plus social networking, as opposed to cisgendered young adults who do not have to seek out heterosexual identified social networks to meet people. So LGBTQIA plus folks end up meeting folks at other LGBTQIA functions or places that clearly make it evident that that's what they support in that establishment. As I already mentioned, cohabitating might occur, and also co-parenting without cohabitating might be occurring. And so that's necessary to point out that a relationship choice, even for same-sex couples, could be possibility of a lack of traditional family structure. Family planning is also a subject that includes conversation of adoption or medically assisted reproductive strategies for same-sex couples. Homophobia is still, as I said, alive and well and an issue in the Black community, especially for men, as it's perpetuated by the Black church, making African American men who have sex with men less likely to disclose their sexual orientation due to higher social stigma. So this demographic also suffers statistically higher rates of HIV, which makes it an issue that they are not disclosing their true identity and who they are with due to fear of retaliation, etc., and being ostracized from their family, their community, and their church. So this is a little bit on interpersonal and close relationships. Hope you enjoyed our presentation and continue on in our unit.